Ever catch yourself wondering if maybe all this time on our phones, like staring at these screens, could actually be messing with our brains?
Yeah, it's a question I hear a lot these days.
I mean, could it really, like, increase our chances of getting something serious down the road, like dementia, or even Parkinson's disease?
Right.
So that's what we're diving into today.
Yeah, the whole screen time and brain health connection, there's definitely a lot of research coming out about it.
Exactly. And to kind of guide our deep dive, we're focusing on this scientific review. It came out in 2022.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's called, get this, Digital Dementia in the Internet Generation.
Mm-hmm.
It's published in the Journal of Integrative Neuroscience, if you want to check it out. And it asks some pretty thought-provoking questions about how all this screen time might be affecting us.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We'll also be bringing in some other stuff, too, just to get a broader perspective.
Sure.
Like, we'll look at Jeff Bezos's morning routine, the whole no-screen thing.
Oh, interesting.
And also, there's this study about how much time we actually spend on our smartphones. Apparently, we're not always the best judges of that.
Yeah, I've heard that. It's easy to lose track.
Totally. So this review article, it's a really good starting point.
Okay, why is that?
Well, it pulls together a lot of existing research on the topic.
Uh-huh.
And one of the main things it points out is how they're defining excessive screen time.
Right, right. Because we got to figure out what we're even talking about here.
Exactly. So they're saying it's more than 2 to 3 hours a day
Okay.
on any kind of electronic media. So that includes, TVs, computers, tablets, obviously smartphones.
It all adds up.
Oh, it definitely ends up.
And what's kind of scary is for a lot of young people today, the average is like way higher than that.
Oh, really?
How high are we talking?
Like 6 to 8 hours or even more every day.
Whoa, 6 to 8 hours. That's a huge chunk of their day.
It is. And speaking of time, the review also mentioned something called the reverse Flynn effect, which I have to admit I had never heard of before.
Oh, interesting. The reverse Flynn effect.
Yeah, can you break that down for me? Like, what is that?
So the Flynn effect, that's the original thing, right? It refers to this trend they saw throughout the 20th century where IQ scores were going up all over the world.
Oh, wow. So, like, humans were getting smarter.
Yeah, basically. But then, around 1975, researchers started to notice a decline.
Oh, so it's like reversed.
Exactly. Hence the reverse Flynn effect.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But why is that timing so important? Like, why 1975?
Well, that's what's really interesting. It happens to be right around the time when screen time started to increase significantly.
Oh, wow. So it's like we were on this upward trajectory, getting smarter and smarter, and then something changed.
Yeah, and you can't help but wonder if there's a connection there.
I mean, it definitely makes you think.
So are researchers saying screen time is the main culprit for this decline in IQ scores? Well, it's not like a simple cause and effect thing, right? There are probably a lot of factors involved.
Right. You're right.
But the review does point to this potential link, especially when you consider how our brains develop and something called the cognitive behavioral brain reserve hypothesis.
Okay, hold on. Let's unpack that a little bit. What was it, the CBBBR hypothesis? And how does screen time fit into all of this?
Sure. So the CBBR hypothesis basically says that the more we use our brains, the more we challenge them, with complex mental activities, the more we build up this reserve in our brains.
So like a mental workout.
Kinda, yeah. And this reserve, it's like a protection against cognitive decline and things like dementia.
So the more we challenge our brains, the stronger they become.
Exactly. It's like building a strong foundation for your brain.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does too much screen time mess with this?
Well, the worry is that spending hours passively watching or scrolling, especially when our brains are still developing, it might limit how much we're actually building up that cognitive reserve.
Oh, so instead of building a strong foundation, we're kind of settling for a weaker one.
It's a concern, yeah. Like it might look fine at first, but it could be more vulnerable to problems later on.
So it's not that screen time is directly causing dementia or anything, but it might be making us less able to fight it off.
That's a good way to put it. It's like weakening our defenses.
Wow. Okay. And the review also talks about specific parts of the brain that seem to be especially vulnerable to all this screen time, right?
Yeah, it does.
So which parts are we talking about? And what kind of impacts are we seeing? This is where it starts to get a little scary, right?
Yeah, well, several studies have found changes in what's called gray and white matter volume in certain areas,
Okay.
like the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the amygdala.
All right. So the prefrontal cortex, that's the part involved in planning and decision making, right?
Right.
But remind me, what do the hippocampus and amygdala do again? And what kind of changes are we seeing in those areas with too much screen time?
Okay, so the hippocampus, that's all about memory formation.
Ah. I mean, the amygdala is more about processing emotions like fear and anxiety.
Oh, right, right. So what are the studies showing about these areas?
Well, they're finding that excessive screen time is linked to reduced volume in both gray and white matter in these regions.
Okay, and just to clarify, gray matter is where the brain actually processes information,
Exactly. It's where all the action happens.
and white matter is more like the communication network between different parts of the brain.
Right, like the wiring that connects everything.
Got it. So if these areas are being affected by all this screen time, it makes sense that it could affect our thinking abilities and mental health, right?
Absolutely. And that's what we'll get into next. The review actually goes into how these changes in the brain can lead to real problems with things like attention, concentration, learning, and memory.
Oh, wow. So like the very things we need to function well in everyday life.
Exactly. And that's why this is such a big deal. These are some of the same cognitive functions that tend to decline as we age, and they can be early warning signs of dementia. Whoa, that is pretty worrisome. It's almost like all this screen time is speeding up the aging process in our brains.
It's a complex issue for
Yeah.
sure, and there's still a lot more research needed to fully understand the long-term effects.
Right.
But those parallels are definitely there. And to make things even more complicated, we also know that excessive screen time is linked to mental health issues like anxiety and depression,
Uh-huh.
which are themselves risk factors for dementia. So it's like a double whammy.
This is all starting to paint a pretty bleak picture. It's honestly making me rethink how much time I spend on my phone.
It's definitely a wake-up call for a lot of us, and it really highlights the importance of being proactive about our brain health.
So what can we actually do about it? Besides, chucking our phones into the ocean, is there any hope?
Well, a digital detox is always an option, but seriously, there are practical steps we can take. The review article talks about focusing on treatment, mitigation, and prevention.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that look like in real life?
Well, treatment is all about addressing the problems, like cognitive and behavioral issues that come from excessive screen time once they've already developed.
Okay.
And that can involve things like therapy, behavioral interventions, sometimes even medication. But as you can imagine, it can be pretty challenging to address those problems once they're already there.
Yeah, it seems like it would be a lot easier to deal with these issues before they become big problems.
Exactly. And that's where mitigation and prevention come in.
Okay, so what's mitigation?
Mitigation is about taking steps to cut back on screen time and doing things that support good brain health.
So, like engaging in those more challenging mental activities we talked about earlier, the stuff that helps build up that cognitive reserve.
Exactly. Reading, learning new skills, playing brain games,
Yeah.
even just having good conversations, anything that makes your brain work and gets those neurons firing.
Right, right. And what about prevention? What would that look like?
Prevention is all about limiting screen time from a young age, especially during those critical periods when the brain is developing so rapidly. Things like setting screen time limits for kids, encouraging them to play outside and interact with other people.
Right.
And also, we as adults have to be mindful of how much screen time we're modeling for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like we're all in this together.
We are. And a big part of this is just awareness.
Yeah.
Being more mindful of our screen time habits and making conscious choices about how and when we use these devices.
Speaking of being mindful, I read this article about Jeff Bezos and how he avoids screens for the first hour of his day. He calls it puttering, which is kind of a funny word.
It is.
But it's interesting, right? Like, could something as simple as starting your day without your phone really make a difference?
There's actually a lot of research that supports that idea. Starting your day without that immediate onslaught of information and stimulation from screens can actually be really good for your focus and productivity. And just for your overall well-being, too. It's like giving your brain a chance to wake up naturally before you jump into the digital world.
Makes sense. It also makes you wonder if most of us underestimate just how much time we're actually spending on our devices.
Yeah.
We all know we check them a lot, but are we really aware of how many hours it adds up to?
Probably not. There was this study from Inc.com that found that young adults are spending an average of 5 hours a day on their smartphones.
5 hours a day. Wow, that's a lot more than I would guess.
It's like a part-time job. And what's even crazier is that the people in the study, they usually guessed way lower than their actual usage.
So our phones have basically become such a part of our lives that we don't even realize how much we're using them.
It's scary how true that is. And that's why it's so hard to change our habits. If we don't even know what they are, it's tough to make conscious choices about how to manage our time.
So it's not about, like, demonizing technology altogether.
No, not at all.
It's more about using it in a way that's good for us.
Exactly. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used in ways that are helpful or harmful. There are tons of ways to use technology to actually boost our brain power.
Really? Like how?
Well, there are a lot of apps and programs out there that are specifically designed for brain training, cognitive
Oh,
enhancement.
yeah, yeah. I've seen those. It's like a gym membership for your brain.
Exactly. And the research shows that they can actually lead to real improvements in things like memory, attention, and processing speed.
That's pretty cool.
Oh,
But it's not all about those specialized brain training apps, right? There are other ways technology can be good for our brains.
definitely. I mean, think about it. We have access to information and learning opportunities that people could only dream of in the past.
Right, the whole world of knowledge is at our fingertips.
We can connect with experts from all over the world, learn new skills, explore anything we're interested in.
It's true. I've learned so much just from watching online tutorials and lectures.
See, and we can't forget about the social aspect of technology. It can help us stay connected with loved ones, build new relationships, find communities of people who share our interests. That social connection is so important for our mental and emotional health.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, of course, can impact our brain health, too.
It all ties together, so it's not just about how much time we spend on our devices, but also how we're using them.
Right, choosing to engage with things that are actually good for us.
Exactly. It's about being intentional and finding that sweet spot where technology enhances our lives but doesn't take over.
It reminds me of something we touched on earlier, the idea that as a society, we're kind of conducting this giant experiment on ourselves with all this technology.
Yeah.
We're only just starting to understand the potential consequences, both good and bad.
Right.
It almost feels like the digital equivalent of, like, the tobacco industry.
How so?
Well, with cigarettes, at first, we were told they were safe,
Right.
even glamorous. And then slowly, the evidence started piling up, showing just how harmful they actually were.
That's a powerful analogy. And it highlights why it's so important to be cautious and ask tough questions about these new technologies.
Totally. We need more research to really understand how to best integrate these tools into our lives without, ending up with a bunch of unintended consequences.
Absolutely. We can't just blindly adopt every new gadget or platform without considering the potential downsides.
Right. It seems like we're at this turning point with technology where we're starting to realize that maybe it's not all sunshine and roses.
There's definitely a growing awareness of the potential risks, and it's starting a much-needed conversation about how we can use these powerful tools in a way that's responsible and ethical.
It's like we've been so focused on the what of technology, what it can do, what we can create with it, that we haven't really thought enough about the why and the how.
And the who. Who is it benefiting? Who is it harming? We have to consider the impact on individuals, on communities, on society as a whole.
Absolutely. And that's where this whole idea of digital well-being comes in, right?
Right.
It's not just about avoiding the negative stuff, but also using technology in a way that actually supports our mental, emotional, even our physical health.
Totally agree. Digital well-being is all about finding that balance between our online and offline lives, using technology to make our lives better, not to take over our lives.
It's about being intentional,
Yeah.
setting boundaries, making sure technology is a tool that we're using to reach our goals, not something that distracts us from living a good life.
Yeah. It's about putting ourselves first, not the algorithms, not the endless notifications.
So what can our listeners do to start building a healthier relationship with technology?
Well, there are a lot of things, but maybe the most important is just to become more aware of how you're using technology right now.
Okay.
Track how much time you're spending on your devices, what apps you're using, how you feel before, during, and after you use them. That old saying, what gets measured gets managed. It's true. If we don't even know what our habits are, it's pretty much impossible to change them.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So once you have a better handle on your own tech use, what's next?
Then you can start trying out different strategies for creating healthier habits.
Okay, like what?
Things like setting limits on your screen time,
Uh-huh.
turning off notifications, maybe even having certain times or places where you just don't use technology at all.
Like a phone jail. I've heard of people doing that.
Exactly. And it's not just about how much time we spend on our devices, but also how we're using that time. Be mindful of the content you're consuming,
Right.
how you're interacting online. Look for information and experiences that uplift you. Connect with people who make you happy. Use technology to fuel your passions and creativity.
So it's about being more proactive and choosing how we want to engage with technology instead of letting it control us.
Exactly. It's about taking control of our digital lives. And it's a process. There will be times when you slip up, when you get sucked into social media or binge watch a whole season of something on Netflix.
Oh, yeah. Guilty as charged.
But that's okay. The important thing is to be kind to yourself, learn from those experiences, and keep trying different things until you find what works for you.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are tons of people who are working on building a healthier relationship with technology.
That's encouraging.
Connect with them, share tips and resources, support each other along the way. We're all navigating this new digital landscape together.
And hopefully we can figure out how to make it work for us, not against us.
I think we can. And I'm optimistic that we can create a future where technology is a force for good. A tool that helps us live healthier, happier, and more fulfilling lives.
On that hopeful note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired to take a closer look at my own relationship with technology and see where I can make some changes.
Me too. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to do the same.
So as we head back into the digital world, let's all try to be a little more mindful, a
Yeah.
little more intentional, and let's prioritize our well-being. Because in the end, our brain health is in our hands.
It really is. And it's a responsibility we shouldn't take lightly.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into technology and brain health. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay well.
And don't forget to take a break from those screens every now and then. Your brain will thank you for it.